Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you for joining us today for another edition of Ahead of the Curve webinar series. And so we've got a fantastic session lined up for you today on persona development. Before we get started, let's just do a little housekeeping just to make sure that we're coming through loud and clear. So everybody's muted. You do have an opportunity to add your questions in the chat, but let's just make sure that we've got everybody that we're coming through on the audio. Great. Okay, excellent. The webinar will be recorded, so that's going to be shared with you after the fact as well. We do have a lot of people coming in from all over the world, so there is a lot of, if you do have any issues with the audio, just recommend that you sign out and sign back in again, or you can always try the phone line option that's available for you. So that's great. Just a little bit about WSI. For those of you that don't know, WSI, we've been around for 25 years, and we've literally helped hundreds of thousands of businesses with their digital marketing. And with COVID, we really thought we wanted to do something to give back, to provide some tips and strategies to businesses with their digital strategy on how to get through this whole COVID period. So we've got a great session, like I said, today for you. We've got Cormac Farrelly joining us from Dublin, Ireland. And Cormac's a very experienced digital marketer. He's an international speaker. He's an author in WSI's bestseller Digital Minds on the chapter of persona development. He's joining us, like I say, from Dublin, Ireland. Cormac's also a world-class sailor in his spare time. But we've got a lot of content to get to today, and I know Cormac's agreed to stay a few minutes after the top of the hour for some Q&A in case we run a bit short of time. But for the sake of time, I'm going to hand it over to you, Cormac, to take us through some content here.
Well, thank you, Mike, for that kind introduction. Just to confirm that I'm coming through loud and clear?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today on this week's Ahead of the Curve. And I'm streaming live here from Dublin in Ireland. And I'm delighted to share some insights today on a topic that I'm really passionate about. And I guess in the history of marketing, it has never been more important to understand our customers. So today, I'm going to talk to you about buyer personas. I'm going to talk a little bit about what they are. Why does your business need to define them? How do you create them? And then we need to consider, I guess, the time that we're in, looking at the impact of COVID-19, and then I'll summarize with some key takeaways after that. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and in fact, it was a topic that I wrote about in our WSI Digital Minds book, and I tried to sum up what a buyer persona was, and really my kind of definition for it was that, you know, a buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of your ideal customer, and it's based on a combination of market research, customer demographics and behavior, and real data about your existing customers, and that overlaid with our own understanding of their motivations and challenges. And I guess, you know, defining the perfect audience or market, it's a challenge, you know, faced by brands in all industries across the world. And you know, assuming you have a great product or service, getting this right usually leads to success, and getting it wrong has the opposite effect and sometimes leads to failure. So, you know, I guess all our jobs as marketers is to kind of understand how your customer wants to buy, and then we need to help them do exactly just that. So next slide, please, Sharon. So we're talking about why why we think that businesses who are on the call today need to think about buyer personas at the moment. And you know, in today's kind of hyper-connected world, it's all about personalization. And if you communicate with everyone, the reality is that nobody hears your message. So if you want to kind of personalize the conversation in an effective way, you need to know who you're talking to. And you know, sometimes when I speak to clients about this, their concern is that they're going to get too niche and that they'll scare potential customers away. But actually the opposite is true. And if you do this exercise, what you'll find is that you'll still get those other non-essential customers coming to you. Next slide, please, Cheryl. So, when you know your customers, you know how to speak to them. But ultimately, what we're trying to do with this exercise is to craft marketing messages to help your customers or your prospects take action. Next slide, please, Cheryl. And, the first thing to say is that understanding your target customer, that really underpins all other marketing activity. And there's 5 reasons really why your business needs to define these buyer personas. First and foremost, the main reason is fairly straightforward. It's to win more business and to increase your revenue. And what you'll find out is that you'll win business from customers that you want to do business with. So ultimately they're your more profitable customers, and they'll have the impact on your bottom line. The second thing is when we build buyer personas, one of the things that we concentrate on are the challenges that your customer faces and how you as a brand with your product and service helps them solve those problems. So this ultimately helps you understand what your unique selling points are and why you're an attractive proposition for your customer. And earlier I said that if you talk to everyone, no one hears your message. And sometimes the reason for that is what I call boilerplate marketing. And on so many websites I come across, everybody talks about, hey, we're the industry leading software solution. We have scalable solutions and other jargon laden phrases like that. So we want to avoid those. The other thing, that we talk to clients about, and I know the WSI consultants that you work with locally in your local geographies, talk a lot about content marketing. And when we go to clients, some of the feedback we get is, hey, I'm investing a lot of time and effort on building content, blogs, white papers, all those sort of things, but it's actually not generating me any additional business. And I guess the missing link in the content strategy, from my opinion, is this whole concept of buyer persona. Because the reality is that if you understand your customer and you know what they're interested in reading, then ultimately production of the content is going to be a much easier exercise. And then the final element is ultimately crafting the perfect message to woo the customer. So that's the holy grail. And if we get to that, then we've a much better hit rate in trying to convert them into business. So as I mentioned, a lot of this content is covered in our Digital Minds book. So on page 29, there's a full description of each of these kind of reasons. So we can pop to the next slide, please, Cheryl. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, I'm going to talk to you about how we create buyer personas. And it ultimately starts by having a kind of a brainstorming session with your team. And I always recommend that you get the management team in your organization, the marketing department, sales guys, customer support, and any frontline staff, that ultimately help, deliver your product or service side, and discuss what the ideal customer looks like for your business. And sometimes it seems a little awkward at first, but it's important to give them a name and to consider some of the demographic considerations that are important for this ideal customer. So when I say demographic, I'm talking about, are they male or female? What age are they? Things like that. And, then ultimately there's 7 questions that we want to tease out about each of these personas when you have the group together. We talked about who they are, but we're looking at things like what's important to them, what influences their decision to buy, how we communicate with them, things like that. And if we could just move to the next slide, the way that we do this, you need to have a process, I guess, around building these personas. And the example on the screen now is kind of doing this in a live environment in an office setting. And the good news is, I suppose, considering our current situation, is that there are tools that we use at WSI to do this over a video conference like this. and in that way, obviously location is not an issue. This persona building exercise is something that your WSI consultant can help you with. And in my experience, it's really good to have these sessions kind of facilitated by an external person, because it helps to kind of keep the conversation moving and you don't get tied up in knots with the kind of internal kind of politicking about views and opinions about your ideal customer. The next thing I wanted to introduce is the empathy map, and the word empathy is not accidental here, because ultimately we're trying to build empathy with the customer and understand why it is that they might use our product or service. And we said earlier that we'd have visual representations. You see that we've picked an image that maybe represents the persona. Let's call this person Mary. It could be John, it could be David. And we give them some demographic characteristics. And then the 7 questions that we looked at on the previous slide, they're all on this empathy map. And some of the things that are really important are the pain points. So we want to know, what is it that's keeping our prospect awake at night? What are their fears? What are their frustrations? What are the obstacles that they're facing that your product or service or solution can help them with? Why would they buy from us? So we talked a little bit about your unique selling proposition. So what is it that makes your company interesting from the prospect's point of view, and how you can solve their problems? And where can they find us, right? So is it online? Is it word of mouth? Is it through advertising? And the idea is that everyone on your team participates in this collaborative discussion, and we use all of these sticky notes in a tactile way to record the ideas. And if we move to the next slide, you'll see what the final output looks like, and that it's effectively a nice chart that pulls the answers to these 7 questions together and really gives you a digital output of what your target persona looks like. And what's kind of really nice about that is that everyone in your organization can get behind this. And when you're thinking about marketing, you know who it is that you're marketing to. Okay, so moving on, we want to talk a little bit about COVID-19, and I guess we're maybe 15 minutes into the presentation, and I think it's the first time that I've used the COVID ID reference, but it is obviously something that's very important, and it's something that needs to be considered in the current climate. So when we're thinking about this persona exercise, you might fall into, and I'm kind of thinking of the businesses who are on the call, you might fit into 1 or 2 buckets. The first bucket is maybe you've already done this exercise yourself, or secondly, it's still something that you think you want to do. And by the way, now is a really good time to kind of go through it, because you're taking into consideration all of these COVID ID considerations. But even if you've done this before, you need to reassess. So what I'd recommend is that, number 1, you're putting yourself in your customer's shoes, and like it or not, priorities have changed. So the pain and gain points that you may have worked through with your customer when you did this exercise before may no longer be valid, and you need to reassess them. And you need to take into consideration and have empathy for what they're feeling right now. So it's understandable that people who are running businesses or who are decision makers in your potential prospects, minor if your product or service is B2C, maybe there are some personal issues that the person is going through at the moment, and they're now probably taking priority. So what they need from you right now may be different from what it was even going back a couple of months ago. So it's kind of really important that you're putting that into consideration. And what I wanted to share with you was a study from Klaviyo. They're an e-commerce platform, and basically they've been collecting data from millennial and Gen X individuals from their shopping behavior since the COVID outbreak happened. And just to give a bit of context, I guess in terms of Gen X, I guess I'd put myself in that bucket. So people who are born in the late 60s or early 70s, and millennials who were born after 1980. And the first bubble there is this is a female Gen X type person, and she's saying, I'm at the point where I don't want all of the brands I'm purchasing from telling me about the virus and what they're going to do about it. I've become exhausted by the messaging. And a second female Gen X person is saying, I'm ready for brands to get back to traditional marketing so we can buy something without it being linked to a tragedy. Lip gloss brand, just sell me your lip gloss and stop talking about saving the world. So I'm not saying that we don't want to be empathetic to situations, but we do need to realize that commerce is still going on, especially if you're in an industry that hasn't been significantly hit. It's important to know that your customers are thinking that. So if I think about even just that bubble on the bottom right from the female millennial who says, now I have more time to think about my decisions. Before the store, in the store, I have to make a decision quickly. So if that person represents one of your personas, you need to make sure that your website is providing her with the information needed to make a decision. So this is a good time to reassess the content on your website and make sure that you're talking directly to the new priorities that your customers are going through. Maybe they need things like use cases, testimonials, that sort of thing. The next thing is that you need to be consistent with your brand positioning. And, brand positioning is probably something that you have been working on for several years. And what I'd really suggest is that your marketing messages, even now, just because we're in a COVID ID crisis, your marketing messages need to match the style that you typically use when presenting your brand and a style that your current customers are familiar with. And that's in terms of kind of language, it's in terms of tone, it's in terms of emotion. So what I wanted to do was to look at two examples here of two videos. So the first is a video. It's an ad from Budweiser. It's the One Team ad, and I'm sure a number of people on the call have seen this already. It's quite an emotive video. And it talks about how Budweiser are shifting the investment they would typically put in sports, and they're shifting that to help all of the heroes on the front lines. And Budweiser, they're kind of known for these type of ads, and it completely fits with their brand. Okay, so that's the first thing to say. The second video is from our company, it's from WSI. And before I make any comment on that, maybe Cheryl, if that's lined up there, maybe we could play it. Okay, so you can see, I hope that video played okay for everyone, but you can see that it's a little tongue-in-cheek. The tone is upbeat, and that's intentional. We stayed away altogether from the emotive aspects of COVID, and instead, we're really focusing on the positive points, and we're acknowledging the reality. We know that everyone's at home, that people are struggling to try and merge business and personal activities in the house. And then most importantly for us, for WSI as a brand, we're focusing on what we feel we can help with, and that's getting businesses moving. So what I'd encourage you when you're putting together your own brand positioning, that you take into consideration what best presents you and continue with that same line of thinking. Okay, so moving on then, the next couple of points that I wanted to talk about are, and they're kind of like the final few considerations, I guess, for COVID, is that it's important to know that marketing content that you created pre-COVID may no longer be appropriate, okay? So you need to kind of look at that and make any changes, knowing that we're now in this current situation. And you might remember back that one of the buckets on the empathy map was, where do customers find you? And in a number of cases, and this may be your case, is that it may have been events, it may have been trade shows, it may have been in a physical brick and mortar environment. If that's you, you need a new strategy. So that's something to think about. And finally, okay, the bottom line is, your customers' priorities have changed. That's a fact. Their fears have changed, and their goals and dreams have been temporarily paused. And that's the reality that we're facing at the minute. And when we're reassessing these persona builds, we need to take that into consideration. The reality is, moving on to the next slide, is that the world has experienced a massive shift in thinking, and right now these are some of the things that people want. They're concerned about safety, first and foremost, and it's a little like the concept of I don't know if people on the call are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When a crisis hits, people are thinking about security in terms of their own personal protection, that of their family. So it's not surprising that even when it comes to marketing, that's important. So you need to be able to let them know, if you interact with your customers, that your products and services are safe, and that you are doing all the right things by your staff and your environment to make sure that that is the case. No surprise to everyone, right now everything is done online, and WFH is the new buzzword, and I just want to make sure that that doesn't get misinterpreted as WTF or anything like that, right? It's work from home, right? So you need to start thinking as a business about how you can provide your service online if you're not already doing that. Another one is virtual demos. We've a number of clients who are in the auto industry in WSI, and a big part of their sales process is a physical demonstration or a test drive, right? I mean, it's logical. It's the same with B2B companies who produce machinery. So now's the time that you got to get creative. So you got to think, how do I come up with new ideas to replace some of the steps in the sales process? In this instance, it's a case about doing some videos, right? So you can record the videos, you can get them on YouTube, you can embed them on the website. It's not ideal, but it is definitely possible, and you can keep commerce moving. Education is a fairly obvious one. I think, I mentioned earlier, a lot of curricular activities are canceled. So, people are using lockdown as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and they want to use this time wisely. So if you're an educator, now is a great time to give them, free training or paid training. And even if it's free training, you're giving back at the minute. And we talked about empathy, and now is a time for kind of giving back, and good things will come from that. Food service is another, right? So here's an interesting thing, right? So what I'm hearing from some clients that I'm working with is that the real source of chat on work chats like Slack at the minute is from millennials who used to grab a bagel on the way to work. They had lunch in the canteen and they grabbed some dinner on the way home. They're now having to fend for themselves and learn how to cook again. So can you teach them to cook if you're in the food service business? Maybe you can give them some ideas about recipes or delivery boxes to go out to the home. And speaking about delivery, one of the stats that I read recently is, so Amazon are having a significant challenge in delivering non-essential items. So there's been a very big increase in D2C, which is direct to consumer brands in the delivery space. So you have an opportunity if your business is getting products into the hands of consumers, you've got an opportunity now that Amazon is struggling. But the number one question that you need to ask is, how can your business pivot? Because it needs to pivot right now to incorporate some of these things and emphasize them in your marketing and advertising. It's just not good enough to say this is the new normal and I'll just continue on my marketing like I used to. That's not going to work. You're going to need to take into consideration the new priorities and market accordingly. Okay. So to wrap up, there's a few kind of key takeaways that I think you should consider. The first is that right now you may be lucky enough to be in an industry that isn't impacted. For example, you may be in a business that helps with kind of communications, or you may be in a business that that provides kind of essential services from a distribution point of view, et cetera. And that's all great. So companies are thriving right at the minute, and there's plenty of clients that we've come across who are doing exceptionally well right now. But the key is, you don't want your brand to come across as being opportunistic. More than ever, consumers want brands to be upfront and honest right now, and you need to focus on helping. As a business, and this is, I suppose, an obvious one, but we've talked about it the whole way through, you need to figure out how to connect with your target customer virtually and sell to them this way. And I know at WSI, and you can talk to your local consultant about this, we spend a lot of time brainstorming across industries as to how we can help customers who used to look at their sales process in a physical way, how to move that online. So it's definitely possible. Number three, you want to put yourself in your customer's shoes. You want to think about these new set of priorities that we all know they have, and how can you pivot your business to support them. The fourth takeaway is around communications. And I know Alison spoke to us a lot about communications on last week's session, but before you send any communication, be that a social post, be it an email to your client, you want to think about your audience. You want to think about this buyer persona, and you're thinking, why am I sending this? Why am I sending it now? And why us? Why is it that our brand is the right company to send this information out? Okay, so if you think about those three things, it'll help you know whether or not you're sending the right communication. And that kind of ties a little bit into the fifth thing here, which is that you do want to be empathetic, of course, to the current COVID ID situation, but stay true to who you are as a brand. Okay, that's kind of important. And I'd like to maybe just wrap this up with a quote from Jonathan Middenhall, and he's the Chief Marketing Officer with Airbnb, which is a brand I really love, and I think they do a fantastic job at marketing out to their personas, of which I'm one. And the quote is, "Amazing things will happen when you listen to your customer." So that's all I've got. Back to you, Mike.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cormac, and getting a lot of great comments, as well as some really good questions here coming through as well. And so we'll definitely take some time for Q&A. Just before we jump into Q&A, I do want to remind everybody that certainly the information on persona development that Cormac shared today, as well as a lot of other digital marketing topics, are available in our Digital Minds book, which is available on Amazon right now. If you search WSI Digital Minds, you should be able to find that. And I just want to remind you about our session next week. So it's a great tag on to what Cormac has been talking about and what Alison shared on last week, which is on conversational marketing, right? We've talked about communicating to your customers, how key that is today. We've talked about making sure you're getting the right messaging for the personas today. But also, how do you use technology in this whole process and some of the opportunities there? And so conversational marketing, we're going to go into kind of using the latest technology and reimagining what some of these conversations would look like today. And that features one of our authors, A.R. Cook, who is also a well-known kind of international speaker on digital marketing too. So that's going to be a great session. And just a reminder, if you've got questions about persona development, or anything that we've been talking about, reach out to the consultant that invited you into this series. Certainly they can help you go through that process of defining some of these buyer personas, or if you don't know who that is, or maybe you came in and haven't been by a consultant, then just contact us at contact@wsiworld.com. Great, so let's get to the questions here, Cormac.
Sure.
And one of the questions that was in terms of this buyer persona process, we've got a couple questions just around that process itself. And so one of the questions was regarding the Post-it notes in terms of using that process and so forth. And I think you recommended that you try to get as many people in the organization involved in that process. And the empathy map I think you shared would kind of help direct that. And so can you just maybe give a little bit more information about how that process goes and typically how long it would take to develop that?
Yeah, okay, great question, by the way. So, as I said, with the session, the reason why we're getting all of these different people from the organization together is that they have a different perspective on things, right? So, customer service versus marketing versus sales. And, you know, first and foremost, it's a brainstorming session, and that's why it's best facilitated by somebody outside of your company, because you need to kind of keep the conversation moving. The concept of the empathy map is that you hang a very large, if you're doing it in a physical environment in your office, just bear with me for that for a moment, you'd have a large A5 sheet, okay, and you would basically go through for each of your personas. You know, you would use post-its to get ideas on each of the topics. So when we talk about pain points, you know, people would just start jumping out, well, I think this is one of their pain points, I think this is it, and there's no bad ideas, right? So you just capture everything and get it down on the post-its, and then you use kind of different color post-its for each of the different areas. What's interesting is the way that the human brain works is graphically. That's a really, really good way to do it, because people see progress and they see that it's moving on. And we struggled for a while, as you know, Mike, to try and find a good software to go do that. And the good news is, you know, at WSI now we have a software solution that allows us to take that very kind of tactile offline mechanism and bring it online. So it's very similar. You're dragging the post-it onto the screen, you're recording it right in front of everyone, and it works really well on a call like this, and can be super collaborative.
Okay, terrific. And so we've got a couple questions just about the change of I guess change of the persona. You talked about the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, the millennials, things like that. Anything else you've sort of come across as it relates to that, or any advice in terms of, you know, if that millennial is your target, is there any advice you would give in terms of how to kind of understand a bit more about their, you know, what's driving them, or their pain points, or their motivations today?
Yeah. You know, it's a really good point, and I think one of the things that we need to be very careful about, and I'm always reminded by this by, you know, a number of people on my team who are kind of in that millennial space, if you want to call it that, is that you end up creating a stereotype. So I guess the example that I showed today was to get people thinking. It was to say, well, hold on a minute, maybe not everybody is thinking about COVID-19 all of the time, and maybe there's still an opportunity to do some normal marketing while still being empathetic. Okay, so that was really the point I was trying to make there. Now, I also said, hey, if this person was your persona, what would you do to, knowing the things that they're thinking about, what is it that you would do to help solve their new priorities? Okay, but we want to be very careful. I mean, there's a persona type that I call elastic Elaine, right? It's where you end up coming up with a persona based on what you want them to be rather than the real person, right? So I think what I'd suggest is that it's fine to have a guide with a particular persona, but you need to make sure that it really does fit the person that you're selling to.
Okay, great. And you know, is this process something that's typically just, you know, for bigger companies, or is this something that any company could be doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, so I think what I'd say to that is that it's an essential thing to do if you're a company where you need to make sure that you get your marketing right. So it actually doesn't matter whether you're small or if you're big. So like if you're a small company and you're making let's say you were making an investment of, you know, $50,000 or something like that. I mean, that's probably a significant investment for the company. So, you know, you want to be you want to be very, very careful to make sure that you get that right. If you look at a very large organization, maybe investing $1 million. So it's all about the relativity of it. It's about making sure that if you're going and you're investing a lot of money in marketing generally, you're putting content together, you're building a website, you're running ads on Facebook. You know, what you don't want to do is go to the effort and the expense of doing that without having a knowledge of who the customer is, because what you'll do is you'll end up blowing a lot of your marketing and advertising budget and not getting the results that you're looking for. And just to say, Mike, I mean, I think one part of the question I didn't answer, you asked a moment ago, was how long this exercise takes. I mean, if you're running out maybe 3 personas, like I showed in my example, you're probably looking like about a 2-hour window to get through that in the brainstorming session.
Okay, so that seems very doable for most businesses. And, you know, as we had mentioned, you know, if you need help with that, definitely connect with your consultant on this. So yeah, just aware of the time here. I know we're already 5 minutes past the top of the hour, and appreciate you kind of spending a little bit of extra time on that. There's been a lot of questions coming in here. If we didn't get to your question today, certainly, you know, our consultant will reach out to you just to chat a little bit more about that for you. And so again, and if you haven't, you know, don't know who that is, connect with us at contact@wsiworld.com, and we're happy to do that as well. And so just another reminder again about our session next week. Hopefully everybody can make it and you're finding value. It's been great to see and hear the responses that we're getting from businesses about this series, that they're getting a lot of really good takeaways. And I think today's no exception, Cormac, in terms of the kind of practical things. I think you've given some people things to think about and that they can apply in their business today. So so that's what we really wanted this to be. So hopefully everybody can join us next week on our session again about conversational marketing at 11:30. In the meantime, everybody stay safe, keep healthy, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. And thanks again, Cormac, for your time today. A great session.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks everyone for joining.
Bye-bye.